I love magic, I love Civilization 6, and these are my Civ 6 themed magic homemade cards. I am Loki the Gamer, and this is the Ethiopia pack. The Ethiopia pack has 6 cards, like all packs, 1 legendary land, 1 leader, 2 unique builds, 1 card based off of the leader's agenda, and finally 1 card named after the Civ ability. Now, normally, the power of the civilization I turn into a legendary land, and I did, but I split it up in this case. One part of the ability went into the land, and the other part went into that 6th card of the set. More on that later. So, an overview of Ethiopia. Well, you can expect a lot of mountain dependency. In Civ 6, Ethiopia cares a lot about hills. Now, of course, in the game, there is a difference between hills and mountains. But in Magic, we already have this ready-to-use perfect concept called mountains, so I decided to just use mountains. Hills, mountains, in Magic terms, it's all the same. So a lot of mountain dependency for this Civ. Ethiopia generates a ton of faith in the game, and if we look at our equivalency chart, my little homemade table that tells us which concept of civilization translates to which concepts of Magic the Gathering, faith equals a bunch of things that all make a lot of sense, but in this case I chose 2 things: devotion to white specifically, of course, and scrying. So you can expect a lot of devotion related abilities and a lot of scrying for Ethiopia. And there is also a little science bonus that Ethiopia can tap into. And science usually translates to card draw. You know, you draw from a library equals knowledge equals science. So that normally makes a lot of sense, but in this case I made science translate into more scrying because it comes from faith. So I figured that, hey, Ethiopia loves scrying, let's give it even more. And finally, Ethiopia does care about resources, so luxury resources, bonus resources, things of the like, resources on the land, and those translate to treasures and food. Treasures in the case of luxury resources, and food in the case of bonus resources. And finally, a concept that is not on the equivalency chart because it is rarely ever mentioned in a Civ's ability or a leader's ability. It's the concept of archaeology, and Ethiopia actually does have an archaeological related ability. And since archaeology is all about digging stuff up from the ground, I decided to turn it into a recur concept, so bringing things back from the graveyard. More on that in just a moment. Ethiopia's color identity is white, with all that faith, obviously, and red, because of its obsession with hills and mountains. So, Boros, white and red, it was always very clear to me. The Ethiopia power in Civ 6 goes as follow. It is called Aksumite Legacy, and it generates basically a lot of faith. So faith from trade routes, faith from resources. So I chose to ignore the bonus faith from trade routes, but I did use the faith from resources. And finally, the archaeological power. So you can purchase archaeological museums and archaeologists with faith, which is quite amazing because those buildings, and especially that one guy, that unit, the archaeologist, is very expensive normally, costs a lot of production or a lot of gold. Doing it with faith is quite amazing, and that is why I chose that ability for the Ethiopia legendary land. The other ability that relates to resources, I turned into a card all of its own. The last one we'll cover. So there's Ethiopia. It enters tapped, produces red and white, and it says whenever you scry, you may instead discard a card. If you do, return a card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to your hand, where X is the number of cards you would have scryed. So there we go. So, as we'll soon see in other cards, This civ is all about scrying. It translates its faith into a ton of scrying. And with this land on the battlefield, you can forego your scrying and instead do some recurring. Of course, it's not easy to really use and abuse a power like that, because as we'll soon see, Ethiopia scries a lot, yes, but it scries a lot of tiny amounts. A lot of scry 1, scry 1, scry 1. According to the rule of this card, you can replace your scry 1 by a recur of a card of mana value 1 or less. So, you might not get a whole lot of choices. Of course, you could build your deck in accordance to that. You could add a whole bunch of red and white creatures that sacrifice themselves to gain an ability, knowing that you can recur them easily. So tiny creatures that sacrifice themselves, little 1-drops that you can therefore recur easily. Or you could also add abilities that allow you to scry better. So if you scry 2, if you scry 3, if you scry 4, then you can recur much better, bigger cards from your graveyard. Or you can also live with the fact that this Ethiopia power might not always be entirely all that useful. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. And when it's not, hey, you get to scry as normal. Just take your scry, use it. You don't always have to turn it into a graveyard recurring ability. And of course, think about it, I'm really proud of this ability because it makes sense. The Civ 6 ability, as we read, said that you can purchase Archaeologists with faith. And as we'll soon see, Ethiopia generates a lot of faith in the form of scrying, so you can, quote-quote, pay with scrying in order to get an artifact out of the ground. So yeah, you use your faith, you use your scrying, you turn it in to get some artifacts from the ground. So that makes sense. Getting artifacts from the ground, I just said, right? Well, in the case of this card, you're not restricted to artifacts. Yes, it might have made a lot more sense to say if you do return an artifact card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to your hand, that's what you get from the ground. That's what Indiana Jones gets by digging up the ground and going onto crazy adventures. He gets artifacts from the ground. It's pretty rare that he digs up a living person. Oh, thank you for unearthing me from the ground. I've been there for 2,000 years. No, so you shouldn't be able to return creatures and enchantments and lands and whatever it is from the ground. You should be restricted to artifacts. Logically, that would have made more sense, but I didn't want the card to be too restrictive. I wanted it to be a better card. So yeah, I turned it into a recur anything you want and throw logic to the winds and instead make a better card instead of a more logical card. But tell me what you think. Maybe I should have made it return artifacts only. Let's move on to the leader of Ethiopia, Menelik II, Counselor of Minister. He is a rare human advisor, 4 mana, 1 white, 1 red, and 2 generic for a 2/2. And of course, since he cares very much about hills, in this case mountains, he gives all of your mountains. And yes, we've got to mention during the overview, expect some stats boost because Menelik II does have some military bonuses associated with mountains. So there we go, mountains you control have pay a red and tap, target creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Now that is mighty expensive, so you lose that mountain and you have to pump another mana into it only to give one creature +1/+0, so that is not game changing, but you never know when that'll be useful. And your mountains also get, more interestingly, your mountains get pay a white, tap the mountain, scry X, where X is your devotion to white. So there you go, the more faithful you are, the more devotion to white you have, the more faith you'll be able to get, the more scrying you'll be able to do. And don't forget, you could turn that scrying into archaeology with that Ethiopia power, and therefore it's in your best interest to grow your devotion to white. If your devotion to white is, again, very small, 1 or 2, then each scry you do will be very small, so very small recurring that you can do with that land. So that is a very interesting card there, I feel, because you do want a lot of mountains in your deck, and therefore a lot of red spells. You want to justify the presence of those mountains. You want them to be there for more than simply using Menelik's abilities, but you can't afford to only have mountains and red spells. You want, first of all, to be able to cast Menelik. He does require some white, but you want a high devotion to white also. So it's a very interesting balancing act. How much red should I have? How much white should I have? I want lots of mountains in order to give them lots of cool abilities, but I also want a lot of white spells in order to have a high devotion to white. So maybe you want to focus on dual-colored permanents that you can cast with mountains and a little bit of white, but that have white in their mana value in order to pump up your devotion. So that could be the way to go. So yes, he's a very interesting, not easy to balance commander. And yeah, you can try to put a whole bunch of scry triggers whenever you scry. Lord of the Rings, I know, created a whole bunch of those. Not exactly in those colors. Most of them are green and blue, but still, if you search high enough, I'm sure that you'll find some scry triggers that you can stick in a Boros, in a white-red deck. And let's move on now to the unique builds of Menelik II. The Oromo Cavalry is a mounted unit with a greater sight than other units. So therefore, greater sight, I decided to turn that into more scrying, because that's exactly what this deck wants. So hey, I gave it more scrying, and scrying is all about, seeing the future. So yeah, greater sight, greater scrying. So the Oromo Cavalry is a 2 white, 1 generic, human horse, common, and yes, as I always say, if there is a dude on a horse on the picture in the unit, then I give the creature both the human type and the horse type. Magic doesn't do that, but I do. It's very important that we have a way of differentiating melee units from mounted units. Civilization cares about the difference, and therefore our cards care about the difference as well. And so there's the ability: when this creature enters, you may scry 1. So I made it optional. If you don't, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And the creature is itself a 2/1, so a weak body for a 3 mana drop, but after all, it's only a common. But you could easily turn it into a 3/2 if you forego your scrying. Then yes, it could be a 3/2, a lot more interesting. And in Civ 6, this unit gets extra movement bonuses on hills, and therefore I gave it Mountain Walk. Good old land walk, not really used in many new cards anymore, but I love to recycle old keywords. It's my prerogative as a fan making homemade cards. I get to use whatever I want because it's just for fun. And now the unique infrastructure of Ethiopia, something that they build onto land. And yes, if we look at our chart, improvements on the land nearly always turn into land auras. And this is no exception. The rock-hewn church is a white-red aura that enchants specifically a mountain, because in the game it must be built on a hill. Hill, mountain, we already covered that, same thing. And it gives the enchanted mountain: tap until end of turn, your devotion to white is increased by the number of mountains you control. So with this beauty in play, you don't care that your deck has some red stuff that doesn't help your devotion, some white stuff that does help your devotion. With this in play, your mountains can help your devotion to white. So that could be very neat. With Menelik in play, you can scry like I've never seen scrying done before. You could scry 10, I swear. And of course, if you have Ethiopia in play, then you can use that scrying to recur any dang thing from your graveyard. So yes, absolutely, things that sacrifice themselves, even if they're big fat things, you can bring them back easily once your scrying grows monstrously out of proportion with either your regular devotion or with the help of the rock-hewn church. So it's a fun card, but it's a card that doesn't do anything by itself. If you don't have anything in play that cares about devotion, this thing is useless. Thankfully, Your commander, Menelik II, does scare, so you can usually count on your commander being in play, so the rock-hewn church should always, in theory, be useful. Now let's look at the card that I named after Menelik's agenda, so what he likes and doesn't like when you play against him in the game. His agenda is called Ethiopian Highlands. I made it a red-red +1 generic common enchantment that has a landfall ability. Now, of course, what his agenda is in Civ 6 is that he wants all the hills. All the hills are mine, 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 mine. You can't settle on hills. If you settle on hills, I don't like you. So I turned it into a landfall card. Whenever a land enters under your control, create a food token. If that land is a mountain, create 2 food tokens instead. So yeah, you get extra food, and you get extra food if it's a mountain. That by itself is already good. It rewards you for having lands, specifically mountains. And of course, it has to penalize your opponents for having mountains. So let's read on. Whenever a mountain enters under an opponent's control, Ethiopian Highlands deals 2 damage to them. So there you go. You play mountains, you get burned. I am only allowed to play mountains. And you get food out of it. And that food will be extremely relevant with this last card. So the card that I named after the Aksumite legacy power of Ethiopia, the one that cared about resources on the land. So since resources are treasures and food, well, I made this an instant that cares about treasures and food. So it's a white +1 generic common instant. Until end of turn, treasures and food you control gain tap scry 1. So, on the one hand, it synergizes amazingly well with the rest of the set because you get to scry. Yeah, only scry 1, as we've seen. Scrying 1 isn't all that great for the Ethiopian archaeological ability, but you know, who cares? More scrying is always good for Menelik. However, the other part of this card doesn't synergize with the set all that well because there's nothing in the set that creates a lot of treasures and a lot of food. Only the card that we just saw does that. The Ethiopian Highlands does give you food, and it gives you that food rather nicely, reliably, but you can't rely on that enchantment being on the battlefield at all times. So basically, if you want this to synergize, then you need to put a whole bunch of treasure and food creating effects in your deck. And who knows, maybe that's exactly the direction where you wanted to take this deck. Have Menelik as your commander, and have a whole bunch of mountains in order to use his ability, but also have a whole bunch of white spells in order to have a very high devotion, and things that care about scrying, things that sacrifice themselves in order to bring them back with the archaeological power, and also create a whole bunch of treasures and foods because you've got this one card that cares about them. That's a lot of moving parts. I'm not sure that is the best way to go. Maybe you want to pick 1 or 2 of these different strategies, but all of that makes for a pretty complex deck with a lot of different thingamajigs. So perhaps not the best way to go. There is one, I'm sure, best way to go, and you guys in the comments will find it, I'm sure. Tell me how you would build Menelik II as a deck, and I'm very curious to find out what you would do. Would you use all 6 cards, or would you, leave this one off the side, it doesn't fit with my strategy? I will talk to you later for another Civ 6 magic little mini set. In the meantime, do kneel for Loki, and subscribe. The subscribing part is the part that I like best. Forget the kneeling.